and welcome to Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Hwang Sunghee, filling in for Na Hyung-kyung. We begin with the latest from the carnage in Paris that has left the world in shock. An intensive manhunt is underway for the perpetrators of the terror attack that left 12 people dead at the Paris office of the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. Now for details, we connect live to Kim Min-ji at the news center. Min-ji, French authorities have identified the shooters, and I hear one of them has turned himself in.
Pyongyang Ambassador Lippert will be making his way out here from the hospital in just about 15 minutes time after giving a short statement to the press. As you can imagine, security here is very tight. You need one of these to get into the press room where the ambassador will be making his speech. This only after you pass a very thorough security check. Now, as you can see, there are police everywhere, both inside and outside the hospital.
So in his New Year's speech, Kim Jong-un expressed his desire to mend ties with South Korea. He even suggested an inter-Korean summit, but at the same time, he made clear he has no plans to end Pyongyang's nuclear program and demanded an end to joint South Korea-U.S. military exercises. So how do you assess his speech?
Yes, Hyungyang, the Yonsei Severance Hospital here has just confirmed that the surgery to treat the ambassador's wounds has just ended and that he is in a stable condition. Now, the attack came at around 7:45 a.m. Korea time, pretty early in the morning, as Ambassador Lippert was attending a breakfast meeting just across the street from the U.S. Embassy in Seoul. The proposal comes at a time when Pyongyang seems to be wanting to mend ties with South Korea. The two-day event opened with the Korea-ASEAN CEO Summit, which is basically a venue for around 570 business leaders to network and open up new business opportunities. Now, in her opening remark, President Park Geun-hye called on the need to liberalize Korea-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, saying that it lacks efficiency compared to Korea's other FTAs. Take a look. Mark, a week has passed since the Seoul ferry capsized, and not a single survivor has been found. However, the confirmed death toll, like you said, is rising at a rapid pace, and the number is now well over 100. Cardinal Andrew Yamsujang's trip to the Kaesong Industrial Complex has been carefully planned over the last 3 to 4 months. However, it was only made public late last night. President Park Geun-hye and the 10 ASEAN leaders arrived here at the Bexco Convention Center just about an hour ago. President Park greeted each leader one by one, and before sitting down for talks, they took a quick minute for a group photo. Now, today's multilateral summit is divided into two sessions. This is the second time for the two officials to meet this year, and they have a lot to discuss at today's talks, ranging from global issues to regional issues, as well as North Korea's nuclear program. However, this time around, topping the agenda will be the upcoming high-level talks between the two Koreas. Well, Jinju, the message is quite clear. They don't want the factory park to be influenced by political tensions anymore. Now, that was one of the key agreements reached between the two Koreas when they reopened the Kaesong Industrial Complex after its 5-month-long suspension back in 2013. Take a listen. South Korea's defense ministry remains on high alert after North Korea launched what appears to be 2 Scud-C short-range missiles into the East Sea at around 6:20 a.m. Korea time, which was about 6 hours ago.
You are one of the longest-serving House member in the U.S. Congress. What would you like to see the most happen on the Korean Peninsula before your term as a U.S. Congressman comes to an end? Do you think it's still an effective tool to get North Korea to denuclearize, or do we need a new form of dialogue? The Obama administration has been making efforts to mend ties with Iran and Cuba. Could North Korea be next on President Obama's list? You served as Prime Minister Abe's envoy to China, and considering that China and Japan have held a couple of rounds of summits while Korea and Japan have yet to meet at the highest level, there are concerns that Korea might be the only one left out of the picture at the end of the day. What's your view? So you don't think that Prime Minister Abe has to necessarily say that the Japanese government was responsible for this human trafficking when he uses the word trafficking?
No, I don't think that the Japanese government actions.
You've also been holding informal talks with North Korea. Do you see any changes in perhaps their willingness to engage? Before your visit to Pyongyang, you also visited China and you met with officials there. Did you have any talks about North Korea with them?
There are tensions between North Korea and China.
Based on your experience as a chief U.S. envoy to North Korea. You've led numerous nuclear talks. Do you think it's ever possible for North Korea to fully give up its nuclear program, or have we come too far to hope for that?
Could these constant purges and executions in turn destabilize the Kim Jong-un regime?
For now, I am against reunification.
Other than mandatory military service, nothing really affects me, so I have no interest.
Realistically speaking, I oppose reunification for now.
A recent poll conducted by the Joseonilbo shows only 2 out of 10 South Koreans are supportive of a reunified Korea. Most in South Korea say that reunification will just add to Seoul's economic burden. And in fact, a reunified Korea does come with a hefty price tag. Figures released by the Korea Institute for National Unification show that the process of bringing the two Koreas together would cost South Korea an estimated $3.5 trillion. But President Park Geun-hye thinks reunification would be worth it.
저는 한마디로 통일은 대박이다. 이렇게 생각을 합니다.
A recent study shows reunification would fuel Korea's economic growth, making it the world's 5th most advanced economy by 2050, with a gross domestic product of $6.5 trillion. With South Korea's technology and North Korea's young population, a reunified Korea's per capita gross national income would increase from the current $23,000 in South Korea to more than $80,000 in 2050. But all this would be possible only under a gradual, peaceful reunification.
But if there are any disruptions affecting this transition process, for example, opposition to privatization, then the cost will increase, benefit will decrease.
But aside from the economic benefits, the single most important motivation for reunification stands.
Some of my relatives were separated from their families during the Korean War. When I see them, it makes me sad.
I don't know the details, but Korea is the only country that remains divided.
I think reunification is essential because one people should not be living with a dividend in between them.
Sunghee, 아리랑 뉴스.
좋은 명절 보내세요. 네, 안녕하세요. 감사합니다.
For 86-year-old Heo Kyung-ok, Chuseok, or Korean Thanksgiving holiday, was just another busy day at work, not an occasion for family gatherings. She has been separated from her family for more than 60 years, since leaving her hometown of Kaesong in North Korea for what was supposed to be a short trip to the south.
I didn't know that Kaesong would be blocked. I thought I would return soon. I left in spring and I thought I would be back by fall, but it's taken this long.
This Chuseok, Kyung-ok is all smiles as she awaits to reunite with her sisters next week after 6 decades of separation. She is one of the lucky 96 divided family members from the south that will travel to North Korea's Mount Kumgang next Wednesday for the first round of family reunions. Millions of Koreans were separated from their families during the Korean War in the 1950s, and time is running out for them to see each other again. Nearly 80% of the participants from both Koreas selected for next week's meeting are over the age of 80. There are still more than 70,000 separated family members in the south, like Kyung-ok, waiting to be reunited with their loved ones someday. But for those attending the reunion, 3 days will not be enough to catch up for the 60 years they were separated.
How they have been, how they have lived. I want to know all these things, how their lives have been.
Sunghee, 아리랑 뉴스. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un appears to be removing anyone who challenges his power. That's according to South Korea's National Intelligence Service. In addition to having Defense Chief Hyun Young-chul executed, the young leader also ousted a number of his closest aides over the last 6 months. In fact, Hyun is just one of 70 officials shot to death since Kim assumed leadership of North Korea in December 2011. One of the most shocking killings was Kim's uncle Chang Sung-taek, who was executed in 2013. In comparison, his father, Kim Jong-il, executed only 10 officials in the first 4 years of his leadership. The South Korean government said the frequent purges are part of Kim's power consolidation process.
The government views North Korea's purges as a method to promote and solidify Kim Jong-un's one-man leadership through the use of fear tactics.
But Seoul's National Intelligence Service said the purges have raised doubts about Kim within the ruling class. North Korean officials are reported to have said that one must be ready to give up his life before speaking up. While some say Kim's efforts to consolidate power will alienate elites, other experts rule out any sign of instability within the regime.
I think the Kim Jong-un regime is using shock tactics to stabilize the leadership. Considering that North Korea is not doing bad economically, the chances of a coup or a revolution are very slim.
Experts predict more senior officials will be purged in the coming days, a measure to ensure enduring loyalty to the North Korean leader. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Actually, there is a very famous slogan in North Korea, nothing to envy in the world. But actually, they should envy everything.
It's no secret that the average North Korean is stripped of the most basic human rights, and compared to them, North Korean defector Kim Kwang-jin says he was afforded a life of relative privilege.
I worked at the best North Korean company, which was called Korea Foreign Insurance Company, and it was managed by Jang Sung-taek, the brother-in-law of Kim Jong-il.
However, all this was soon to change once he was suspected of leaking important information to enemies like the United States and South Korea. If he hadn't escaped, Kim would have been forced into one of the country's many political prisons, where An Myung-chul, a former guard at one of the camps, says prisoners are subject to inhumane treatment.
Those in North Korea's political prisons are very miserable because they are jailed, forced into labor, and are abused for a very long time. It's like a modern-day version of a slave prison.
It's believed that at least 200,000 people are being held in North Korea's political prisons, where rapes, torture, executions, and slave labor are common. In an attempt to end North Korea's alleged crimes against humanity, the UN Human Rights Council passed a resolution last week to launch a thorough investigation on the issue. Of course, there are doubts about the effectiveness of the UN probe, as it's highly unlikely that the UN inspectors will be allowed on North Korean soil. However, many believe that the investigation could turn out to be a much bigger threat than any of the sanctions ever imposed on the communist nation. Ultimately, the investigation could take North Korean leader Kim Jong-un all the way to the International Criminal Court, which could lead to division within North Korea's ruling party.
Sanctions from nuclear provocations are imposed on the entire ruling party of North Korea, so it's an occasion for them to join forces. But reports to the International Court of Crime are made on an individual, so it could divide the internal government and spark a power struggle.
There's no doubt that the UN probe will cast much-needed international attention on the dire human rights situation in North Korea. And for people like Mr. An, the investigation is a flicker of hope for his family back in the north.
I have my mother and my brothers and sisters in political prisons. I really hope that an investigation into their conditions will be made as soon as possible.
Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News. You see high-rise apartments, taxis, people using mobile phones, and children on rollerblades all on the streets of the North Korean capital, Pyongyang. Now, North Korea has recorded 3 straight years of economic growth, although it is in the 1% range, and experts attribute this to Kim Jong-un's relaxed regulations.
Small companies have been granted autonomy in management, although there are limits to self-sufficiency. Such marketization through Changmadang or black markets allows people to more easily buy materials.
But for a real economic liftoff, North Korea needs to attract foreign capital. For that, 10 more special economic zones were established this year, raising the total number to 24. North Korea claims over 300 foreign firms from countries like Australia and Singapore have invested more than $1.4 billion US, although these zones are known to have received just $400 million, with 80% of the money coming from China. North Korea's unilateral manner of doing business is keeping investors away, says a Dutch businessman who leads business-related missions to North Korea.
North Korea is also open for business and for foreign investment, but the foreigners, they are not going on a large scale into North Korea. And this is all politics, I'm afraid.
Experts say as long as Kim Jong-un clings on to the so-called Pyeongjin line, or dual development of nuclear arms and the economy, any effort for change will be futile.
North Korea may become more aggressive in introducing reform measures next year to form a Kim Jong-un-style economy. But there will be limits unless there is progress and dialogue on the nuclear issue, like the resumption of the six-party talks.
They also note the need for secure legal measures, as the world saw North Korea's commitment problem when it unilaterally closed down the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex for 5 months last year. 황상희, 아리랑 뉴스.